Okay, so Warren, we're going to talk about the SEP. So I think let's start with why is budgeting important and what is the SEP tool?
Okay. Well, obviously, from a budgeting perspective, you need to find out exactly where your money is going, okay, before you can actually start budgeting. Because if you don't know where your money is going, then how are you going to put a budget in place? The SEP tool, though, on the other hand, is not a budget, okay? That's actually, call it the pro forma before a budget, okay? So it's strategic expense planning, more tracking tool. And within that SEP tool, you obviously split your money in between variable costs and then fixed costs, and that's extremely important. The money coming in from a monthly basis, obviously there's those monies that go out as in EFTs or debit orders. Those are fixed costs. Those are every month expenses that happen, okay? Then your variable costs need to be split from that. And through your variable costs and your fixed costs, you can then determine your excess money that you've got, and then obviously you start moving on along with your SEP tool. And that is just called, it's a basis of how the SEP tool works. I mean, I'm not going to get into every single tab that we've got in the SEP tool, but that I feel is the most important part on the money that you get from a monthly basis, and moving it into those two formats splits it up, so you're not looking at just one page and trying to derive where all that money is going on a monthly basis. So that is extremely important. Then from there we start itemizing what is between fixed and variables, and obviously what happens in your variable costs.
So the thing is, and what you said there as well, is it's so important to start with something like this. And it's not a budget. You don't start with a budget, you start with expense tracking. I always say you cannot predict or cannot plan where your money's going next if you don't know where it's gone.
Yes.
You first have to see where your money's gone. And this is the problem. Most people think that budgeting is a predictor of the future. They say, okay, so they start the beginning of the month and they say, all right, so I've got this much money in my account. This is everything I need to pay this month. So I'll be fine. There's going to be some money left. And then by the 20th of the month, the money's gone. They start dipping into savings or dipping into their credit card or their overdraft. And they go, that's been a tough month. But next month, this is going to happen. But people very seldom go and look backwards and say, but why was it a tough month? What actually happened? Is it that I misjudged my expenses? Was there unforeseen expenses that came off once? Why did it come off? Should I not have paid it or whatever? Should I not have bought that red shoes this month? Whatever the case may be. Because if you don't know why you're in trouble, you're never going to be able to fix it moving forward. So it is so important to have a budget. I think we have two things that say minimize your risk is your foundation of your financial plan. So it's critically important to make sure that your risk is sorted out. But almost more important than that is you have to have a proper budget, because without a budget, nothing else happens.
100%. And I think a lot of people presume a budget is taking a piece of paper,
or a little Excel spreadsheet.
Or a little Excel spreadsheet, yes. And then they're writing down things and they just assuming that, so let's say there's a fixed amount that comes off that's around about 500, and I'm using the word specifically roundabout because that's what they do. It's 520 odd rand, or it's 600 and something, and they add up all these assumptions and say, okay, well, that's how much I think I'm paying from a fixed cost every month. But they're not really looking. Like you say, the most important part is go back, draw that statement, look where every single cent, and I mean every single cent. That's also another big mistake. They don't look at the cents. They just round everything off. Yeah. When you're rounding out your expenses that come off your account, and there's most probably about 100, if not more, and you're just rounding off, at the end of the day, you're losing quite a few rands, if not tens of rands, and maybe sometimes even hundreds. Yeah. So look at it, and look at it every single month.
I mean, the studies we've done and the statistics we've done shows that about 67% of people that earns an income has no budget at all. They just go see what's in their account, debit orders go off, and they know whatever's left they're going to spend. They have no plan. They just move forward. 30%, give or take, has a basic budget, and that's what you're talking about. Just writing down the big things,
Yes.
and all the other things are just, well, we'll see if we can get through the month. And only about 3% of people have a proper in-depth budget that looks at foreseen expenses, unforeseen expenses. They have a proper plan. And funnily enough, that 3% has more financial stability and security than the other 97% combined.
For
And
sure.
that is why it's so important to properly start planning your money. The thing that we talk about at the forum, and we'll chat about the forum now. I see Fricky's sent us a reminder to tell people about the forum. So the thing we teach people at the forum is that analogy of if you had only 500 liters of water a month, what would you do to make sure that you can survive on that 500 liters? Remember a couple of years ago, I don't know if it's been more than 2 years ago, Cape Town had that massive water shortage. So they started limiting people's water. So we say, well, what if you had a limit of only 500 liters of water? How are you going to survive? Because water is literally life.
Yeah.
If you don't have any water, you finish your 500 liters in the first 3 days, then you're not going to survive if you can't get water somewhere. So what you would do is you would say, okay, what do I need water for? How much can I allocate to each of those things, and see that you've allocated your water? What can I reuse? What can I use more optimally, etc., etc. But the funny thing is people don't do it with their money, because that's also a finite resource. Doesn't matter what your income is, you only have a certain amount of income to work with. So some person has 15,000 Rand, some person has 30,000 Rand, somebody has 300,000 Rand, but it's still finite. So you need to sit down and really have a plan of saying, what am I going to use my money for? How am I going to allocate it better? Can I optimize my spending on it? And it's almost like people feel like a negative thing if they start being critical and what's the word? Very specific about where their money's going. Almost like, oh, I don't want to sound like I'm selfish.
Yeah,
I don't
frugal.
Yeah, because they connect a negative connotation to it. And people need to go away from that.
Yeah.
Because again, if you only had a certain amount of water and you started limiting it's not because you're selfish, it's not because you're frugal, it is because that's all you have, and you have to make it work for you. And I think that's the whole thing about the SEP.
I think another thing people do is they leave all their money in one account. So once all the fixed costs are off, okay, then you've got this money sitting there. So they don't now allocate that money in a specific place.
Yes.
And exactly what you're saying in Cape Town, and when Cape Town was on those water rations, I happened to go down, and when you have a shower, you just put a bucket in the shower with you. You can't believe how much wastage you have
Just
on
runs
water
down the drain.
that goes and just falls in the bucket, even though the drain is open. But the extra amount of water one accumulates in a shower, and then you use that to top up the toilet or whatever the case may be. So why don't we do, like you said, why don't we do that? So once your fixed costs are off, you've got that X amount of money. You must allocate certain amount of that money for your variable costs. And if you allocate only a certain amount, that's all you have to spend. The balance then goes into either your debt or your reserve account or building your financial future. But people don't do that. So they leave it in that account. That's the money they've got to spend. That's why by the 20th of a month, there's too much month for their money.
Exactly.
But if they allocate it and know every time they spend X amount of money, that's all I've got left, you will see that it only takes 2 or 3 months to develop that.
A new habit.
The habit comes in, and once that habit is in place, you're fine again.
Exactly.
But like you said, people tend to have this thing that they're too scared to talk about it and allocate only a certain amount.
Yeah.
And it's to their detriment at the end of the day.
And to tell other people no. People say, come out with us for dinner. If you don't have the money yet, we feel bad to say, no, I can't. It's not part of my planning this month, because we sort of feel like people will look at us and say, oh, you're a party pooper, or you're like so freaking, what's that? There's a specific word, Scrooge.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
Uncle Scrooge. Yeah, so you're a Scrooge, you don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
And it's not that. It shouldn't be a negative thing.
Yeah.
It should be a positive thing, but we're making it a negative thing.
Well, it's keeping up with the Joneses. If that person's got a new car, now you want to get a new car. If that person's got a new bicycle, you want to get one. And so it goes on. But you might not be in the same situation yet. Doesn't mean that you never will be, but if you take control of your money and you know what you've got to spend and how much you can, then you can start saying, okay, I might not be able to do it this month, but in 3 months' time I can do that.
Exactly.
So have these smaller goals. I think if you only think of retirement, that's a long-term goal. It's important, yes. That's fine. You need to have that long-term, but also have short-term goals. Because a long-term goal, a person gets bored. They start forgetting what that goal is for, and then they'll start spending their money. But if you have these shorter little goals that is more easier to get to, you're not going to veer off your track, and that's also extremely important.
Yes. Then we've got a comment from Warren. Even if you are in the situation where you could afford it, never say I can't afford it. Rather say, I choose to rather invest this money somewhere it will work for me, especially in front of children. That is so true. That's something I've tried to do my whole life with my kids. My kids think I'm the richest person in the world. They think I'm like Bill Gates or something, because I never told them we don't have the money. I always said, we're not going to spend our money on this. I don't feel it's worth spending our money on this. So we have the money, but we choose not to do this, even though sometimes we didn't have the money. But it's about creating that perception in your children's mind. Do you create a perception of lack? Yeah. There isn't enough, there isn't enough, there isn't enough. Or do you create that perception of control? That, listen, we choose where we're going to spend our money.
Exactly. And also what's important at that time. If they also learn to understand that sometimes you need to say no to something. In other words, like Warren said, we choose not to do it now because their goal is to maybe that they wanting to purchase a bicycle 3 months down the road. So they also need to start thinking on where their money, their pocket money that you give them, where it's going. I mean, yeah, we're all talking about adults using a SEP tool, showing one another or showing themselves where their money is going and what they're going to do with it. Give the SEP tool to your child. I mean, even if your child is in grade 6, look, I'm talking grades, should it be standards? That's my age, I guess. But anyway, just give it to them. If they're getting pocket money, give them the SEP tool. Let them start seeing where their money is going. Exactly on their statement. Let them draw the statement. Let them see exactly what their cents are doing for themselves.
Yes.
And also the interest rate. Gee whiz, so I had X amount of money in, so much was left over, I got X amount of interest. It might not be a lot, but let them start understanding what money does. And that's important, because I think most people that are sitting in financial or ruin or sitting in a little bit of a predicament in their finances is simply, and it's not really their fault, it's just from an education perspective. Exactly. You say it all the time. Come out of school, go into varsity or get an education, go and find a job, work for 40 years, come out expecting you can retire. Biggest mistake.
Yeah, not happening.